Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of A Modern Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tosha Anderson, and I'm really excited today to have a conversation with Karen Nolte. Now, Karen and I actually know each other, not just colleagues at this point, but actually before I started this firm, I was actually essentially the CFO for Karen and her organization. And I was really excited to just bring her on board. She was my mentor for many, many years. And I want to dive a little bit more into how she was able to work for an organization for many years, became the CEO of that same organization, walked through a merger, Karen, you did, and now you're kind of on the other side, or at least still maybe on the tail end of coming out on that side, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Karen, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your words of wisdom and all of your years of leading a really significant size organization now, I would say.
I am delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So I know, Karen, when you and I work together, and certainly I think it still rings true, there's just this spirit of excellence. And we always say, and I still use this phrase to today, we are rule followers. I say that to I say that now, look, we are rule followers or doing things by the books. And because of that spirit and that kind of leadership style that you have, I think Family Forward is really, and even before then, before the organization merged and the organization that you were leading at that time, really developed a reputation of high quality, high integrity, and really just distinguished upon, many of the other, I guess, competing organizations, for lack of a better word. For example, I remember we were applying for an application for a pretty significant contract, and it was a huge compliment that they said, you all are kind of the standard. Once we get your application, we start comparing other applications to yours because we trust that, your application is of the highest quality standards. I thought that was, I'm sure you too, incredible compliment. So thank you so much for that, right? But tell me, what are some of the other ways or important ways that you within your organization, or maybe you counsel other organizations to distinguish yourself as a high quality organization? What are the, I guess, authoritative bodies you look at when you're thinking about these sorts of things?
I think one thing that's been helpful for us, both to publicly distinguish ourselves and also to have standards to work by, is to look for some type of national accreditation. So to work in this field, you pretty much need to be licensed. We're in child welfare, as you know, but most of the fields have some type of licensure that they need to work in with some basic standards, and that's great. To go beyond one step and to say we have voluntarily chosen to become accredited, I think is a really important step that you are telling the public you wanted to do more to be accountable to them. So there are certainly some of the bigger ones. You would be familiar with Council on Accreditation, or COA, because that's what we hold. There are others like CARF, and they provide great standards for organizations to compare themselves to, because they are putting out best standards and they are national. Now, that's a big step for some organizations. So for smaller organizations, one place I really like to counsel people to start is our local Better Business Bureau. So the Better Business Bureau nationally has standards. There are 20 organizational standards. They are grouped into 4 categories. They have one around governance and oversight, one around finances, one around measuring effectiveness, and then finally your solicitations and public materials. So within that, those 20 standards are a very good roadmap of accountability. The local office here will work with any charity that wants to pursue that, but that's a really good place to start. And it lets you know these are the best standards. These are the best practices of nonprofits. If you choose to go the Better Business Bureau route, the other nice piece about that, in addition to helping your organization, you are eligible to use a seal that is a Better Business Bureau seal. And I find that really is a way of speaking to other businesses, because they are very familiar with what they've had to do to become a seal holder. So national accreditation, local accreditation, something that says we did this voluntarily because we want to be the best, is a great place to start and to land.
And I think one of the things people probably don't realize that these accrediting, processes and the renewals are no joke. I mean, these are pretty rigorous to go through. And I remember one time looking at different software to really gauge programmatic outcomes. And so many organizations say they want to know these things. They want to know this information. They want to go through this process. But really, do you? Because I think once you go through these things, then you realize where your deficiencies are, where you're falling short, and then putting things in place in order to, continue to make improvement there. So I remember just with the program, that was one example. If we launch this thing and we have this, we will collect all of the data points to tell us whether we're effective or not. And that could be an ego blow, and I think that you could fill the blank in for any of those areas where, people could really have an ego blow with respect to, we thought we were doing everything properly. That absolutely is not a deterrent, by the way, to not go through this process. But you're absolutely right. The Better Business Bureau is a great place to start. And then, of course, like you said, Karen, the accreditation. And for those of you that don't know about accreditation, I would say, and Karen, you probably actually know this more than I do, even though obviously you work in child welfare primarily, but I have found there are multiple types of accrediting depending on your type and your mission of organization. So I've seen faith-based organizations, I've seen early childhood education, child welfare, like as Karen mentioned, Council on Accreditation or the COA. There's a bunch of different accrediting bodies. So if you're not familiar with accreditation, just do some searches, connect with other people within your immediate kind of service area network. And I'm sure that there are accrediting bodies specific to kind of the missions that you work with. I think COA might be one of the largest ones. Is that correct, Karen? I think so.
Yeah. And they just actually went through a merger, so they are pretty big now, but they do a good job and they're well recognized. And any of these are a way, as you said, to distinguish yourself. And if you are a good agency, you want to know about that data. You want to know where you, we're going to call them opportunities as opposed to deficiencies, but you want to know where you can improve, because that's what matters to your, ultimately to serving whoever you serve or accomplishing your mission.
So you've been, around the nonprofit space for a while. We won't go into how many years. Karen, you like to joke that you work for an agency that kind of initiated by adoptions, right? And Karen likes to joke she's just was born there, was never adopted, so she just kind of lingered and got a job and now just runs the place. But
that makes me younger.
Yeah, exactly. You certainly have mentored many people and have held different positions within organizations, including obviously now a CEO for many years of this organization and now a merged organization. What is an important message that you think leaders of nonprofits should know?
So many messages, but I'm going to go the direction of the merger at this point in time, because that's something that I think any leader will be faced with those questions, whether it's a merger, an acquisition, some type of partnership, and not in the old days where you had an MOU with anyone and everyone that would sign it and you actually didn't work together. Now people are working together and funders are expecting that. And it's really important to be able to find the right partners, because it's going to be difficult, just like any human relationship, to be in it for the long haul. And so you need to find the right partners to do that. And one way that I found that was really beneficial for us, for many years, I would look at something that happened, a partnership or something that had happened in the community, and think, wow, we would have been perfect to be a partner there. I wonder why they didn't call us. And so as I got a little wiser, it occurred to me that people did not pick their partners through a Google search. And it was important to get out there and have people know who you were and what you were doing. So I had a board member once who said, all of your senior leadership, not only at the C-suite level or the director level, if that's what you have, but the next level down, should really be involved in some type of organization that relates to their field. So if you are the CFO and the United Way has an accounting group that meets, that's a good place to be. If you are working in domestic violence and there are certain coalitions, then you need to participate in something like that. And so it really does two things. One, it keeps us abreast of what's happening in our field, which is really important, because as you know, with any business, you can get lost in your office and get a lot of work done and never even walk out the door. And that doesn't serve you well in the long run. It certainly gets your work done that day and your email box cleaned out, but it isn't going to serve your organization as part of a larger community. And in addition to getting out there and you are learning things, you are also having people learn about you so that when they are looking for a partner, they know that Karen, or pick a name of any of my staff who are out there, they've worked with them, they know what they do, they know that it's somebody that they're credible. And so we have since then, in addition to this merger, which was significant, but we participate in several consortiums, or several agencies have gone together to bid on certain state opportunities, certain state grant. And it's been because we're out there. So I probably started listening to that board member primarily because he made me nervous, but it was a very wise advice, and it's really helped our agency a lot.
I love that. Just networking, getting, like you said, informed about what's going on in the world. We say that kind of in the for-profit world. Many of my colleagues, especially as accountants, we tend to find ourselves, nose down to the, what you're working on, and in what we call that, you work so much in your business that you don't work on your business, right? And I think the same applies for organizations. They spend so much time on the service delivery and just really focused on the work that they're doing, not realizing what other kind of time investments can we make to strengthen the organization as a whole. So not just working in it, but on it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you had mentioned the merger that you went through. So what advice would you have about, organizations? And this has been a buzz thing, right? For, I don't know, as long as I've ever been in the nonprofit space, over 15 years now. Seek partnerships, seek mergers, work collaboratively, and more funders continue to press the issue of mergers. And so I know there's many organizations out there, as the board that we both worked under, Karen, had suggested, let's identify some merger opportunities or where we can better collaborate, partner, and strengthen the services we're offering in the community. So there's a lot of organizations probably out there thinking about this. So what advice would you have about, any other advice or takeaways that you would maybe suggest for people considering these sorts of things, and who to look for or what not to look for?
Sure. So before you're looking for something, what was really nice about our organization before we merged, we weren't in a position that we had to merge. So we weren't looking for a partner to bail us out. We were a strong player. We felt like we could take some of the services we have and bring them to scale. We also had enough financial resources that our board said, if the organization is going to, or if the community, is going to lose a service because another organization is going to go out of business or something like that, we should see if that matches, because we have public dollars that people have donated to us to execute these kinds of services. So that was in our head in the background. And then we really had a session with our board to say, what would the deal breakers be? What scenarios, if I, as the leader, am going to go out and look for opportunities, what are the scenarios that would or wouldn't be acceptable to you as a board to bring it back? And what we found was not exactly, but pretty close to what we were looking for. But it was easier for me to then know what our board wanted and what we had to do, because by the time you look on one of the job boards and you see that they're looking for an executive director for an agency, that decision's already been made. And so knowing what's out there is really important. So that was a really important part leading up to the merger. And then I would say going into a merger, it's very important that you're really clear with the language that you're using. So our particular organizations came together, and it was to be a merger of equals, which meant that we weren't adopting all of the policies of something and saying, welcome, here's the t-shirt. We really were going to do this from scratch. It's really tough to do, but is the only way that we were going to actually be able to do this merger, because both organizations were strong. Both boards saw themselves as strong. A lot of people use the word merger, and it's really an acquisition. And so I think that's really important language too. If there's a smaller organization and that you are going to be acquiring them, that at least at the legal level, you use the right language. You want the staff to feel good. You want folks to feel good about that. But the reality is that's going to make a difference as to how you approach things. And it's not the first thing you would think about, but it is definitely something that's critical. And then there's all sorts of things. I will put a plug in for finances for sure, but even the simplest decision about, do you have the same fiscal year? When are your contracts working? How many audits do you have to come till you get to a first basic piece? And I use that as a nice example because in our first year, we ended up having 5 different audits. We didn't have the same fiscal year, and we didn't merge on either of those fiscal years. So
Mhm.
those of you that know finance know what we just said. But it really, the bigger part is, don't assume you can do it yourself. You don't have to have a ridiculously expensive consultant to take you all through it, but you need to ask questions of professionals in those areas
Mhm.
up front, because it will make things a lot easier on the tail end.
There's so many of those little unintended consequences of merger
Yes.
that you just would never even realize. And I think that's an important distinction, right? When you're thinking about mergers and acquisitions as a nonprofit, you had mentioned that you really felt two equals, really even equal in size, right? Or, not far off from each other in
Right.
size and staffing and programming and history, both were very well established organizations. And so anybody looking to either be acquired or a small struggling agency looking to be acquired, really differentiating the difference between the two, right?
Right.
I think that is a pretty big distinction in there. So, lots of changes going on over there and lots of growth, even though you have been in this leadership role for a long time and the organization. When you merged, how many years was the organization you were running in existence? 100 and
Was founded in 1891,
so
and
I
we
was like,
merged in 2017.
so whatever that is, lots of years off the top of my head. But there's an evolution with each organization. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. How do you think about your organization now as it's growing and changing and evolving?
I love that question. There's a resource that I really like. It is a book called Navigating the Organizational Life Cycle. Paul Connolly is the author. And in that, there are a lot of models, but this model makes a lot of sense to me. If you picture, and I won't use my arms to show it, but if you picture the first half of a bell-shaped curve. So when an organization is starting, they are at startup. As they come up the curve, so it's the development and more sophistication of that organization, they use the term adolescent. And when you get to the top of the curve, your organization is mature. Now, that sounds like a great place to be, but you can't actually stay and not be continuing to change and upgrade to be relevant. So when you hit that mature spot, once you have been there for a little while, you are either going to start stagnating and potentially move off into becoming defunct or becoming irrelevant, or you're going to have to swing back. So we'll circle down at the bottom, swing back to somewhere on that curve going up, somewhere with that adolescent piece, because you're adding a new program, or you are certainly merging or acquiring, a lot of different things that your organization can do to start there again. And it's really important to think about where your organization is on that curve. I find that very helpful to me. It's also really important as a leader to know what space is your best space on that curve. And by that, I mean, I would be dreadful at startup of an organization. It is not my thing. I couldn't do it. And so me taking a job like that or trying to lead that would be a bad match. I also wouldn't be great at the mature piece. It is very important to just know where you belong. And so if someone is at a mature organization, they need to be really solid at running things the way they are, and then thinking about opportunities. And maybe when the opportunity comes, moving out so someone else can do it. My sweet spot is in that middle spot. So we're doing something different. It's a little murky out there. We are people who follow the rules. That is my quote. You're absolutely right. But knowing them and figuring out where that is for your organization to continue to move you up that bell-shaped curve, if you will. One of the things I like about the book, at the towards the end of the book, there are sections that describe each of the main capacities. So leadership capacity, governance capacity, all of the types of capacities that are important for an organization. And that's a really interesting part. But the part I like best is there are descriptors, say, of leadership capacity. What does leadership capacity look like if you are in that startup spot? What does leadership capacity look like if you are in the adolescent or the mature, or becoming defunct or starting over? And so for me, it was easy to look at wherever my organization was along that continuum, and I could look at the next box, the next description, and know where we should be headed. And so it was really like a roadmap for me. It's one of the things I like about the book. The other part, I've started really thinking about people in that same organization, and not as an individual, but as a team. So my team, for example, I have a fair number of people who would all fall in that adolescent, let's do something different. I got to be doing something different. And I have one person who really is well suited for mature. And none of them are good or bad. But that person probably looks at the rest of the people on the team and thinks, for God's sakes, can you just stop for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
And I've said to them sometimes, I said, imagine if we had a bunch of people on the team who were all mature, and you had one person who was that, always the adolescent bringing something new, and the rest of the team would look and say, can you just rest for a minute? But your team makeup, where your organization is, where your sweet spot is as a leader, and what is the makeup of your team. I find this book and that model really helpful for thinking about all those things.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I can relate because we're like startup,
Yes.
I don't know. I feel like every week we go from adolescent to, youth, adolescent to youth, every week it's, something different, and different people and personalities, whether it's, where they're at in their careers, or where they're at in the comfort of that particular job, or maybe just their particular personalities. I mean, some people just get really comfortable with knowing exactly what's going on and that level of predictability. And other people get a little stir crazy. So it's interesting when you look to hire people and where you're at within your organization. For example, for me, I know I would struggle to retain people that really were, they couldn't handle change. If they were really, really on edge or uncomfortable with constant change, they probably wouldn't work out so well here. But it is rather exhausting for some of us, even if I'm the one that's constantly, ruffling things up, hey, we're going to do something different. Even me, it's like, why can't I just sit still for a minute? But I think that's really interesting too, so I meet so many founders of nonprofits, and they're really good at the new ideas, the visionaries, the creators, right? And this is something that I've realized over the last few years, that the creators, the visionary people, are not necessarily the get the stuff doneers, right? They come up with all the ideas, but they're not necessarily one that's going to cross the finish line. And so sometimes within organizations, I could see where there would be a situation where founder, like, I'm going to get this thing up, I'm going to get it going, I'm going to get the program launched, I'm going to get the mission out there. And then as an organization might become a little bit more mature, it might be better suited for a different type of person to step in and kind of take on the leadership beyond that. So I can see that would apply.
Certainly hard for leaders, but I think a really important observation. You're 100% right as it relates to founders or anywhere on that spectrum, because if you're mature is a great thing, and it is steady and it is going for the long haul. Great for the people who really love that. It wouldn't probably work for you. You are definitely great in startup, having known you since you started up, and that's probably your sweet spot.
Well, it's kind of funny. Yeah. My business partner, he always says, I don't know if I want to be a CEO. I'm more of a right-hand person, kind of, you take the lead and you make all of the ideas and changes and I'll execute them. I said, great. That's perfect match.
Good.
We all need those people, right? So beyond programming, let's talk a little bit more about because your organization has been around forever. They're very stable financially, programmatically, all of things like I said, we're the rule followers with the standard of excellence, according to funders and other people that looked at, your stuff. How did you, talk a little bit more about how you get that level of stability, because your organization hasn't always been that way, right? When you kind of stepped into a leadership role, there was some volatility a little bit financially. There's ups and downs with any sort of relationship or business, and your organization's been around for so long, you certainly had your fair share of those. Talk to us a little bit about the stability of the organization and maybe some advice that you would give on how organizations that may or may not be in that situation, how would they get there?
Sure. Well, yeah, there's been a time since I've worked here. I like to say I wasn't a leader at that point in time, but we were within 6 months of going out of business in terms of how much we were losing as opposed to our operating reserve. And of course, that's a downward spiral, because the less money you have, the less interest you're making, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the funders now really see your operating reserve as an important indicator of your ability to weather some things like COVID, like what happened in 2008. And you see, certainly with COVID, that's right on our mind. Not all the organizations have been able to make it. And that's unfortunate. what the most important thing I think, and this is not simply because I'm talking to you, because I've said this before, I think the most critical thing you need to have is really solid person or service working on your finance. So
Mhm.
when we were within 6 months of going out of business and moving into that, when I did take over, the most important person for me was our CFO,
Mhm.
because that individual could look at where our funds were, know where our weaknesses were, um, really at some points look at cash flow on a daily basis, which was important for our internal survival. It's also important externally that you have um, funders, donors, whomever, that
Mhm.
know that you are being managed appropriately, that your finances, if they contribute to you, that those finances are being managed appropriately, and that you don't have any skeletons in your closet. That's what I like to say with funders. When we meet someone new, you're not going to dig and find that 5 years ago we didn't send you a report or we forgot to send you something. So for me, the strongest partner you can have starts with your financial situation, because that speaks volume to
Mhm.
the community. You've got to have your mission, your programs solid, your outcomes solid, or people don't want to invest in you. And I think the logical assumption often is we don't have money, we need fundraising. And
Mm.
fundraising and marketing is critically important. So, to all of the fundraisers and marketers that are watching this, it is not to say that that's not critical. But if you don't have the financial controls in place, you're not going to be able to fundraise, and you're not going to be able to follow those funds when you have them. So, I think your best partner starts with someone who can make sure that your finances are sound, and that solid programs, solid funding, finances gives you a platform to do all of the other things you need to do to keep a business running that you just alluded to.
I think certainly, I'm always trying to preach that for sure, but so oftentimes I think we think immediately the next person is a fundraiser. And you and I have seen this where, from community partners or other nonprofits, they will lose funding or they will be passed up on funding, just one little misstep. And it takes years to
Yes.
rebuild reputation with one little misstep. And I think also what's important too is having a good relationship with that financial person. And I hear all the time nonprofits, I actually had talked to a woman that said, I don't trust myself with the money. I just want to hire someone to do the money. I don't really want to be involved with it. And I had to just say, you, as the founder and CEO, that's not really an option. You have to be involved. You have to know what's going on. Just like for me in my business, I have to know what the finances are. I recognize that's a bad example because I'm an accountant and I'm running a business. So it's easy for me to say that. But if you're not great at the numbers, you can certainly work with someone that will help you at least get better and more comfortable with it. Absolutely. I see that oftentimes. I've talked with people that were afraid of their accountants, so they just didn't ask any questions. And, I'll just take the reports, even though they don't entirely make sense to me, but work with someone you like, right?
Well, and that's where if you don't follow that, you certainly have a risk of fraud.
Mm,
And that's not something you want to happen, first of all, to your organization.
yeah.
Secondly, to have that be public, because this community, and I'm sure many, but this community has a long memory.
Hmm. Yes. In St. Louis specifically, I think you're talking about, because we have listeners all
Yes.
over, but I would
Oh,
imagine any
sorry.
major, no, that's okay. Any major, you're absolutely right though. I know organizations that, a couple missteps for years have just been mixed over. So I always say good financial management is almost like or good accounting is an insurance policy, in some ways,
Yes.
for risk management.
Risk
You just
management,
really,
absolutely.
yeah, you can't misstep. So
So I'm sure there are other communities that have the same thing. I was referring to St. Louis, but many of us that have been in the field for a while can remember, 10 years ago, so and so had a problem with something, and it just stays out there as their mark, and that's not what you need. And you have a huge responsibility to your donors who have entrusted you with funds.
mhm.
um, there's a public trust there, and you need to be responsible for how you're spending those funds, be able to answer questions about that, and do it wisely.
Yep, exactly. So Karen, that's all of this has been so helpful. And that pretty much wraps up all the questions I have so far. But I always like to ask one question. I always like to hear all the different responses. So how did you end up working in the nonprofit space and getting into this leadership? Tell us a little bit about your kind of career. Most people, I never planned on being here. I never planned on running an organization. I loved hearing different people's story. How did you end up here?
Well, we are actually doing exactly what I would have wanted to do and loved. When I was younger, I used to actually work at a preschool, and I also worked teaching swimming. And there were some kids that I was just crazy about them. They were always the kids who were little on the edge. So I'm going to use the word rotten, and not in a serious way, because I love these kids, but they were always stirring stuff up, and they had some special needs. And as I learned, as I got older, I thought, these are the kind of kids that I want to work with. And so my undergraduate degree was actually in special education, behavior and emotional disorders. That's what it was called when I graduated. And spent a little bit of time with the kids in the classroom. And what I realized was, at a little boy who got up for show and tell. That was what the cooperating teacher had in mind. So we were doing this. And he shared a story that was a domestic violence story of something that had happened to him the night before, or his family, not him. And I wanted to just take him aside and work with him on that. And I realized in a classroom that I really couldn't do that, because obviously educational needs are clearly very, very important too. But I was really drawn to that. So I ended up getting then a master's in counseling psychology, and really wanted to work with kids that had those struggles. And so throughout this and the adoption of the overarching model that we are using right now, the neurosequential model, we are working with kids who have really significant trauma histories that oftentimes creates some behavior and emotional challenges for them that need help. And those right back to the kids I want to work with. Now, the tough part is I'm doing it as a leader, and I don't have individual clients, but I also get to see what the organization is doing. So I feel extraordinarily lucky to be where I am. And if I work for the same organization until I retire, I will be very proud.
That's awesome. So speaking of your organization, if anybody wanted to hear more about the work that you all are doing, what's the best way for people to find you?
So we have obviously a website, FamilyForwardMO.org. A lot of times people miss the MO part. So happy to see that. I'd be happy to talk to anybody if they want to know more about the organization or something more about what I've said. My email would be Karen, Karen, Nolte, Nolte, at FamilyForwardMO.org. So happy to talk to anybody. Happy to have you visit our website. And we're doing some really, really great things that we're really proud of. So, and we are reinventing ourselves a little bit every day. So we're in the sweet spot that I like, and also I think good for our community. Ultimately, our role and our desire is to be a community-wide resource for developmental trauma. And we're specifically working on developmental trauma, those things that happen to children that really impact their brain development when they're young, although the implications might be older, or that's when people might come for services. But we want to be a regional support source for developmental trauma.
I love that. Thank you, Karen. It's been so great having you on.
It was nice to see you again. Thank you.
You bet.